Richard Hargrove had spent 53 years building his name into something untouchable. He was old Charleston money, third generation, plantation-turned-real estate empire, a man who sat on 4 corporate boards and donated to the right politicians. His white tuxedo cost more than most people's monthly rent. His handshake had opened doors that most people never even knew existed. Today was supposed to be the greatest day of his life. His son, Ethan Hargrove, was marrying Cassandra Wills, the daughter of a prominent Atlanta senator. It was the union of 2 dynasties. Every photo would end up in the society pages. Every moment had been orchestrated by a $200,000 event planner. Nothing was left to chance. Nothing. And then Diana Carver walked through his garden gates. Richard spotted her immediately from across the courtyard. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. He didn't know her name. Not yet, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. She did not belong here. Thomas, he said quietly to his head of security, a thick-necked man who had worked for the Hargroves for 15 years. Remove that woman, immediately, quietly. Thomas moved, but Diana didn't run. She didn't flinch. She stood exactly where she was, in the center of the stone walkway, and looked directly at Richard Hargrove with eyes so steady it almost felt like a warning. Thomas reached her and leaned in. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to. I'd think carefully before you finish that sentence," Diana said. Her voice was low, measured, the kind of voice that had learned long ago that it didn't need to be raised to be heard. Thomas blinked. Something in her tone made him hesitate. But Richard was already striding forward, his white tuxedo blazing in the golden light, his face flushed red with the kind of anger that only comes from being accustomed to never being questioned. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he said, loudly enough for the closest tables to hear. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Cassandra's mother grabbed her husband's arm. Ethan, standing near the altar, went pale. Diana turned and looked at Richard directly. "I think," she said quietly, "that I'm the woman you've been trying to avoid for 3 years." Richard's eyes flickered, just for a moment. Then the arrogance flooded back in. "I don't know you," he said. "And you are trespassing on private property at a private event. Officer," he turned and raised his hand toward the uniformed officer standing near the main gate, "Officer Thompson. I need you to escort this woman off my property. Right now." Officer James Thompson walked forward. He was young, late 20s, broad-shouldered, with the careful expression of someone who had learned to read a room before acting. He had been hired as part of the event's private security detail, a courtesy arrangement through the Charleston PD. He reached the center of the courtyard where Richard, Thomas, and Diana now stood in a silent triangle of tension, with 200 wedding guests craning their necks to watch. Thompson looked at Diana. Diana looked back at him. And then something happened that no one in that garden expected. Officer Thompson reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a badge wallet, and held it open, not toward Diana, but toward Richard. "Mr. Hargrove," Thompson said carefully, "I think you should take a look at this." The badge was federal. It was gold, with the seal of the United States Department of Justice embossed across the center. Beneath it, an ID card, and a photograph. The photograph was of Diana Carver. Special Agent Diana Carver, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division. The silence that fell over the garden was absolute. Richard Hargrove stared at the badge, then at Diana, then back at the badge. His face, so red a moment ago, went the color of old chalk. Diana reached into her own jacket pocket and produced a folded document. She unfolded it slowly, deliberately, and held it at her side. "Richard Hargrove," she said, her voice carrying now across the stone courtyard and up into the oak trees, "I have spent 26 months building a federal case against Hargrove Capital Partners for wire fraud, money laundering, and the illegal redirection of investor funds totaling over $47 million. She paused. "Your son's wedding was the last event on your family's calendar before you boarded a private flight to the Cayman Islands tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Gasps swept through the crowd like a wave. Ethan stepped away from the altar. "Dad, don't," Richard said. His voice came out cracked. Something had broken behind his eyes. That certainty, that lifetime of untouchability, beginning to cave in on itself. Diana stepped closer. Not aggressive, not triumphant, just steady. "I didn't come here to ruin your son's wedding, Mr. Hargrove," she said. I came here because your lawyers spent the last 3 months blocking every subpoena and delaying every hearing. Because 2 federal judges have had their rulings mysteriously appealed at the last minute. Because 14 of your former investors, ordinary working people who trusted your fund with their retirement savings, are now broke. And because I made a promise to every single one of them that I would not stop. She held up the folded document. This is a federal arrest warrant, signed this morning by a United States District Court judge. It has your name on it. The garden erupted. Women gasped. Men stood from their chairs. Cassandra's mother burst into tears. The senator grabbed his phone. Ethan sank onto the altar steps with his face in his hands, the white boutonniere on his lapel suddenly looking like a cruel joke. And Richard Hargrove, the man who had called a cop to remove a woman from his property, stood frozen in the center of his perfect $200,000 wedding, surrounded by his most powerful friends, as 2 additional federal agents who had been standing quietly among the catering staff stepped forward and flanked him on either side. Officer Thompson holstered the badge wallet and stepped back. He had simply been the messenger. Richard looked at his son. Ethan, he started, but Ethan stood up slowly. And when he looked at his father, there was something in his face that wasn't shock anymore. Something that looked, almost, like relief. I knew, Ethan said quietly. I've known for over a year, Dad. I just didn't know how to stop it. Richard stared at him. I'm sorry, Ethan said. To his father. And then he turned to Diana. I'm sorry, he said again. Differently, heavier. Diana looked at Ethan for a long moment. Then she nodded. Just once. A small acknowledgement of something complicated and human. She turned back to Richard. You have the right to remain silent, she said. And Richard Hargrove, who had never been silenced by anyone in his life, said nothing. As the agents led him through his own garden, past the chandeliers and the white orchids and the 200 faces he had spent decades impressing, Diana Carver walked with them, her black dress unmoved, her pearl necklace catching the last light of the evening sun. She had walked in with no invitation. She walked out with everything she had come for. Behind her, in the stunned silence of what remained of the wedding, one of the older investors, a 72-year-old retired schoolteacher from Columbia, South Carolina, who had been quietly seated at a corner table the whole time, watching, pressed both hands to her face and began to weep. Not from sadness, from relief, from justice, because she had given her life savings to Hargrove Capital Partners. Because she had trusted. Because she had been told her money was gone and no one would ever answer for it. And tonight, in a garden full of chandeliers and broken illusions, someone finally had. Diana sat in her car outside the Hargrove estate long after the last police vehicle had left. The garden was quiet now. The caterers were packing up. Someone was carefully removing the orchid arrangements and placing them into white boxes. She thought about the 14 families. The teacher from Columbia. The veteran from Greenville who had invested his disability settlement. The young couple from Myrtle Beach who had trusted the fund with everything they'd saved for their children's college. Her phone buzzed. A text from her supervisor. Clean work, Carver. Case closed. She put the phone face down on the passenger seat and stared at the glowing windows of the estate. It never felt the way people thought it would feel. Justice never arrived wrapped in triumph. It arrived quietly, in the middle of someone else's party, in a black dress, holding a piece of paper. But it arrived. Diana started the car. That was enough. La boda era perfectamente hermosa. Candelabros de cristal colgaban de robles centenarios cubiertos de musgo español. Orquídeas blancas adornaban cada camino. Cientos de las personas más poderosas de Charleston estaban sentadas en sillas doradas bajo el cielo de Georgia, vestidas con esmaquines y vestidos de diseñador, bebiendo champán y susurrando sobre que evento tan magnífico había organizado la familia Hargrove. Y entonces ella entró. Diana Carver cruzó las puertas del jardín con un vestido negro y un collar de perlas, tranquila, serena y completamente sola. Sin invitación en la mano. Sin acompañante. Sin disculpa en el rostro. En segundos, comienzan los murmullos. ¿Quién es ella? Pertenece aquí. Alguien debería llamar a seguridad. En 30 segundos, alguien lo hizo.